Okay, here we go.
As we're doing it. Well, it's good to have you guys in class tonight. I was telling Ontario, please, that we were supposed to have a new student tonight, but the email address that the school gave me doesn't work, at least not for me, and so no new student. Anyway, we're glad to have you two guys, and tonight's a kind of a difficult night for me. The psalm that it's the next psalm in sequence, and in studying it over the last week and going through some of the things that I've gone through in the last week, it kind of hit me kind of hard, but we're going to get through this and learn some things, hopefully, from it.
All right.
How would you classify this psalm that's on the screen? Do you know it?
I don't know it per se.
You gotta know it. If I sang it to you, you'd know it. It comes from an old sitcom called Hee Haw. Do you know what Hee Haw is?
Oh, Hee Haw, yeah.
It said, gloom, despair, and agony on me, dark depression, excessive misery. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. This is it's an old country, I don't know if it's a country song or exactly what it is, but you might classify it as a funny little zinger that creeps on the line of impropriety if you had the rest of the words. But if you take it out of its comedy routine that seems to have given birth to it and put it on the lips of someone actually suffering, it becomes what's called a lament. What do you know about the book of Lamentations?
Songs of gloom, most of them.
Say it one more time, Ortega.
They're from what I understand, they're kind of like songs of gloom.
Your sound,
suffering.
It is. It's a lot of folks, and I believe it's true, believe it was written by Jeremiah, the Lamentations of Jeremiah. And the word lament is a Latin word that means to weep, to cry. And as we look in the Bible, we'll find a few passages, some in the Psalms, here in the book of Lamentations, and maybe a few others, that are, if you understand them and you understand the context from which they come, they are quite painful to read, especially if you hear them, and I want to use the word feel, if you feel them coming from the depth of that person's soul who's writing that. Tonight, our class is going to be a little bit different than usual. We're going to do a lot of reading of scripture. And the purpose is to get us, I don't know if it's the right way to say it, but it's the only way I know to say it, to get us in the mood for the psalm that we're going to eventually get to. From a personal perspective, like I was saying, this class seems to have worked out providentially. We're going to be looking at Psalm 74, which is the one right after Psalm 73 that we looked at last week. I didn't choose this psalm because of a event that I'm going through in my life, but nevertheless, it's laid before me at the time that I'm going through a pretty traumatic time for me anyway. And it's turns out that I think providentially so that we're studying this and tonight, at least for me, maybe not for you, but at least for me, it's providential that God brought me to this this song at this time. It's a time of confusion. It's a time of heartbreak. It's a time I don't really know how to voice my pain, my frustrations, even anger, questions. I'm not a person, you guys don't know me that well. You've known me for almost a year, I guess, but through an hour or two a week. I'm not a person who usually gives in to emotional outbursts. But when it seems that, and it's not true, it just seems that way, that everything is spinning out of control, the pressures of decisions about what to do seem unbearable. Even those we consider to be the strongest of people can be brought to their knees in despair. And if I can use the phrase in such a way, their lives can become a wreck. Well, I know that within reason, my life is not a wreck. I am blessed in so many ways. The dominating circumstance in my life right now makes me feel that way. And as I prepared for studying this psalm tonight, Psalm 74, with you guys, I found that I'm not the first to feel that way, nor will I be the last. And I think that's why Psalm 74 is in the Bible. For me at times like this, or maybe for you at times like that in your life, or for Asaph when he wrote the psalm, and others. So let's think about, as we get into this, let's think about a couple of questions. The one's on the screen in front of you. What is a lament? How would you define that?
Yes. Can you hear me clearly now?
I can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay. I was saying earlier that lament, to me, it feels kind of like songs of doom, gloom, that sort of thing.
Okay. I heard you say that. I just couldn't get that last word, doom and gloom. That's what it is.
A deep emotional feeling, feeling of sorrow, of despair.
Right. That's the idea that I want us to get into tonight. And it's not really a cheerful idea. We don't like classes or songs to make us sad, but sometimes that's where we are. And I don't want to make you sad or anything like that, but we need to understand how to deal with that sorrow. We can deal with it in wrong ways. We can deal with it in right ways. Like I said, the word means to weep. And the purpose of a lament, what would you think? Why would God put that in the Bible? Why would God give us a song or a poem of weeping in the Bible?
Because that is a natural human emotion.
Okay, it's part of who we are, part of who we're created, and if we're not understanding of how to deal with emotion, we can deal with it in wrong ways. Yes. Like any other emotion or any other feeling, if we're not understanding of how to deal with it, and one of the reasons we have the Bible is to help us understand our humanity, not only from a spiritual standpoint, and especially from a spiritual standpoint, but also from a physical standpoint, an emotional standpoint. God knows who we are. He created us. And so he gives us in the wisdom literature, particularly, a means of how to understand or how to deal with parts of our human makeup that aren't necessarily spiritual. There are many spiritual teachings, of course, in the wisdom literature, but there's also ways that teach us how to deal with our emotions, our stresses, our anger, our hurts, things of that nature. And God knows that we have those times, and He didn't leave us without as far as how to address those times. Laments.
We also see that we see that with Jesus, as it tells us, Jesus wept. So we see that he not only had empathy but sympathy. He could relate to the human feelings and emotions.
That's right. That's right. He became a man in every sense of the word. He knew how to cry, or he could cry. He could feel pain. emotional pain, just like you and I do. Someone could hurt his feelings, just like they hurt, our feelings can be hurt. Jesus went through the things that we go through. He gave us an example of how to accomplish or get through those things. Lament, crying, you might say, weeping, is a form of protest. When we cry out, we're saying, I don't like what's happening. A lament is a way of drawing everyone's attention, even God's, to the terrible things that are happening in my world, that are happening to me, that should not, I feel anyway, should not be happening. And it's not simply a complaint, a murmuring like the Israelites did in the wilderness. It's deeper than that. A lament, while it's centered in self or in the person, it's not self-centered. There's a difference between crying or whining because I don't get my way and lamenting about a painful circumstance that I don't understand and can't control. Someone who loses a baby, for example, that person probably wasn't prepared for that. They were expecting life. They were expecting 20 years of enjoying that baby, enjoying the life of that person, and then all of a sudden this new baby is gone, and we don't understand why. Why did God do this to me? Why did this happen to me? And that's a lament. Now, if we're not careful, we can allow those to turn us bitter. But it's a form of protest, and it's a thing that God gave us, a means that God gave us to, if I can say it in that way, to cry out, to ask why. A lament is a divinely given strategy for processing emotion or grief. I took a class, it wasn't last year, I guess it was the year before, in Christian counseling, and learned a lot about grief. I didn't learn enough, but I learned a lot about the psychological process of grief that we don't allow ourselves to go through. We Americans we try to make ourselves above grief. We're gonna hold it all in or try to fix it ourselves. We need to grieve when we've lost something. We need to grieve, and we need to learn how to do that. And lamenting is part of God's plan for that. People do it all the time. It's a healthy response. Grieving, lamenting, it's a healthy response to a loss that we've experienced. Only a few will actually go into the effort of putting words to poems or poetry or putting words on paper, but we all, from time to time, lament. We cry out when we're hurting, when we're having that pain. The psalmist and some of the places that we'll look at tonight, they wrote it down. By inspiration, they wrote it down. And sometimes poets or singers of our day and time, they feel a pain, they've been hurt, and they write it down and put it to music. And they're lamenting, and you can see that you can hear it in the songs that they sing, when that you can tell something's happened in their life to hurt them, and this is their crying out. In these lament poems of Scripture, God's people verbally and poetically vent their anger at what's happening around them that's caused by other people's sins, other people's selfishness, and they cry out. Let's say a riot takes place overnight in your community. You saw it coming, you took your family and you fled the scene for everyone's protection, and you eventually return home to your house or to your place of business, and you find it destroyed. What words might you use to express how you feel in that moment?
Devastated.
Devastated? You're angry.
Yes.
You did nothing to deserve this. I mean,
Yeah.
these people came and they acted in a horrible fashion, and they burned down your house, or they burned down your business, a business that you've put 20 or 30 years into, and now it's just all gone. And there's a lot of emotions we're going through in times like that. And that's where some of these laments in the scriptures come from, not because somebody burned down their house, but yes, even that. And laments are a means of voicing that frustration, voicing that confusion. Suffering often makes us ask questions about God's character and God's promises. We look to God and say, why are you doing this to me? Why is this happening to me? And we're in our lament, or in our thinking process, we're accusing God. And maybe that's not our intent, but that's what those words do, what those words say. We might ask God, what about all the promises you made? You said that when I become a Christian, I will have, and maybe it's because of a misunderstanding of what we thought God was promising, but nevertheless, that's how we feel. And so we challenge God. In the poem that we'll look at tonight, the author will be saying, you say we are your turtle dove. You say that we are your children. You say that we are your bride, your people, your priest, your nation. But then we experience this horrible thing that's happened in our lives. And the psalmist, or the lamenter, is crying out. It doesn't make sense. He's confused. And so he voices that confusion through this cry, or through this lament. From a biblical perspective, as far as what we see in the scriptures people doing, it seems that it's not wrong to voice these complaints to God. It seems, if I understand inspiration and the reason these stories are here, or these songs are here, it seems that God wants to know how you feel. He wants you to say how you feel. It's good for you. He knows the reasons. It's not like you're giving him information that he doesn't know, but he knows that you need to express this. You need to get this out and express it. And as you do that, as you're going through that process, you may say things that are probably not things that you really believe or you really think, but you're getting it out, and it needs to come out, and you can then begin to rationalize what you said or what you're thinking. And so I think God gives us these examples of lament, these kind of songs, so that we can know that we can do that and should do this, not be irreverent to God, not be offensive in our words, but even if that happens, we're getting it out and learning to cope with it, learning to deal with it.
Brother,
so I think these laments, and yes, ma'am.
Would you say that Jesus lamented on the cross when he was saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?
I think probably that's something of that nature. He felt forsaken. He felt deserted. And at that time, God had turned his back on Jesus. He had to. Because God didn't love Jesus. It's because God loved the world, and he knew that this event had to take place, but that didn't make the pain any less for Jesus.
Yep.
Both the physical pain and the spiritual pain. Jesus had never, Jesus is an eternal being. He was God in the flesh, and he became, before he was God in the flesh, he was God. He was with God. He was a part of God. He was eternal with God. He had never been separated from God. And even when he came into the flesh, he still was not separated from God. He walked with God. He walked with the Spirit. But here on the cross, for the first time in all eternity, he felt that separation. The sins of humanity were on him. He was taking their penalty, our penalty. And for the first time in all eternity, Jesus, the Word, the Logos of God, was separated from God, and he felt that, and he cried out. And so, yes, I would say that's what that was. And when Jesus said that there, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? On another occasion, he had told us that, he and the Father are never separated. The Father is always with him, and that's true. But I'm not saying in that moment he forgot that, but in that moment, I can't say how he felt. I can only imagine how he felt. In that moment, he felt deserted.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what that was, Ontario. It's a good point. And I think these laments that we'll be looking at tonight, are a permission to do that, a divine permission to do that, and an instruction how to do it. You can do it in a wrong way, I suppose, and so God gives us instruction on how you might do this. One author said that these poems of lament give a sacred dignity to human suffering. And I like the way he said that, or I like the way he phrased that. Book of Lamentations is a unique and I think a masterful work of poetry. It's made up of 5 poems, and the design of the poem or poems is very intentional, and that design is actually a part of the book's message. If you don't catch the design, if you don't catch what he's doing, not just what he's saying, but what he's doing with the material that he has, you might miss part of the message. So I want to look at the book of Lamentations. It's not Psalms, but I think in order to prepare us for Psalm 74, we need to look at the book of Lamentations, which is the greatest lament in the Bible. And so we're going to spend some time here tonight before we actually get into Psalm 74. Chapters 1 through 4 are called an acrostic. Do you know what an acrostic is? An acrostic is a word game, a word play, where you take a alphabet letter or an alpha character, and in a poem, you alpha character to begin the first sentence or first word in a sentence. Here's one here, a simple one in English. See what the author did?
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
That's an
acrostic. There's another message in the message.
That's right. That's an acrostic. The word hope, and then he uses the letters HOPE to give a thought about what is a hope. So that would be an example, a simple example of an acrostic. The Book of Lamentations is not a simple example of an acrostic. This took a lot of work. If it was a human doing it without inspiration, this is a work of months or years to put this down on paper. He's doing it by inspiration, so I think he's got a bit of an advantage as a poet. But what he does is he takes the Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters, and he takes each of the 22 letters and begins the first line of each individual line in the poem. For example, in verse 1, it will start with the alpha or whatever the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And he goes down the line, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, 22 letters in verses 1 through 22. Each letter or each verse beginning with the next sequential letter in the alphabet. He did that in chapter 1. And then he did it in chapter 2. And then he did it in chapter 3. And then he did it in chapter 4. It took a lot of work.
Interesting.
Just try to do that sometime on any kind of work, and you'll see just how difficult that might have been. And so he's not only using the acrostic to write the poem, but this is coming from his heart. This is coming about the context in which he's living. He's giving us a divine message, and it's all done with the acrostic. And that, to me, from a literary point of view, that is a challenge, a major challenge. I know preachers, that's how they preach. They make their sermons an acrostic. they begin each point with an R or a P or a T or whatever. And that's just to help them remember their points, or maybe to help people remember their points. I don't do that. I'm not good at that. I don't even like it. But I respect it.
Right.
A person who has that ability can do that, and especially a person who can write 22 points off of the Hebrew alphabet and do it 4 times sequentially in his work. So there are 4 separate poems, but they're all beginning with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Each particular line begins with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The order and the design of the poem is in contrast, and here's that part of the message that he's trying to convey to us. While he put down this poem in that kind of order, in that kind of design, the life that he was living at that time was absolutely disorder, absolutely confusion. And I think he's trying to teach us or tell us something by the way he delivered this message. You might say that Israel's grief and suffering is explored from A to Z, and the poem is trying to express the inexpressible. Chapter 1 of Lamentations is expressing the grief and shame of what we'll call Lady Zion. He personifies the city of Jerusalem as a widow, and she's also called in the text the daughter of Zion. And it's like when you read it, a mournful woman at a funeral of a loved one, calling upon someone, in this case God, calling upon someone to look upon her and feel her pain. So imagine that mother that we spoke of a few moments ago who lost her baby, and she's writing this message, and she's calling upon God to feel that pain with her. That's what a lament is. Chapter 2, we'll title this part of the poem as God's Wrath. He's concentrating upon the fall of Jerusalem and how that is a consequence of Israel's sin, and how that brought about the wrath of God. And the word wrath, it's a key word in that particular poem in chapter 2. It's a key word, and it's important to remember that God's wrath is not like what we often see in humans. When we think of the word wrath, we think of hot anger and also oftentimes acting out in our anger. But that's not what God is doing. So we need to make a difference, or see a difference between what God does or what man does in his wrath and what God does in his. This is not some volatile knee-jerk reaction to a thing or an event. This is God, and he is expressing his wrath or demonstrating his wrath. But when you look at how the biblical poets and prophets use the word wrath in reference to God, it's more about justice. God is bringing justice, what is deserved by the person who is going to feel the wrath of God. In this case, in the book of Lamentations, Israel had entered into a covenant relationship with God, and for centuries, hundreds of years, they had been violating that covenant. In fact, from the very day the covenant was made with them there back at Mount Sinai, before the I do's were said in the marriage covenant that was taking place there between them and God, they're already violating the covenant. They had made that golden calf and said, this is the God who brought us out of Egypt. And so they weren't faithful to God. God was being faithful to them, but they weren't being faithful to God. And we can't really measure God's wrath in any one event, whether we're talking about the event around Lamentations or some other, without first measuring God's long suffering. Maybe you remember the event in Exodus 34, where in Exodus chapter 33, Moses said, I need to see who you are. I need to know more about who you are in order that I might better represent you before the people. And so God said, okay, I'll show you. And he says, you wait for me tomorrow, and I'm going to pass before you. You can't see my front parts because you're just not ready for it yet, but I'll show you my hinder parts. Remember that story?
Yep.
Here, I think I have it on the screen. Yeah. Now the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him, that's Moses, stood with Moses there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. This is what I look like. The word Lord there, you see it capitalized, it's the name Jehovah. He proclaimed the name Yahweh. And Yahweh passed before him and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh God, merciful. Here he is. Here's what God looks like. This is just the hinder parts of God. Merciful, gracious, long-suffering, abounding, full of, bubbling over with goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity, forgiving transgressions, forgiving sin, and by, here it is, no means clearing the guilty. All that good stuff, mercy, grace, long-suffering, abounding in goodness, mercy, forgiveness, and then there is by no means clearing the guilty. Who are the guilty? Well, they're the people to whom God offered mercy, to whom God offered grace, with whom God was long-suffering, and they thumbed their nose at him. I don't care. They continue to do what they want to do. They live like they want to live, and they won't repent. They won't turn from their sins. So God says, I was long-suffering with you. I gave you mercy. I gave you grace. I was long-suffering with you. I extended goodness and mercy and forgiveness, and you thumbed your nose at me, so you get nothing, honey. By no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children for the third and fourth generation. So that's the picture Moses saw. And concerning Israel, hundreds of years later, and their continued violations of the covenant that God made with them there at Sinai, with their idolatry, with their oppressing of the poor, with a general disregard for God's moral law, God rightly judged them. He was long-suffering. He was slow to anger. But when their lack of godly sorrow demonstrated centuries of no repentance, no matter what God did for them, and they continued to act in a depraved way, God eventually gets to the point where his wrath is demonstrated, or to say it in another way, justice came to light. In an amazing book of Ezekiel, you're probably familiar with the wheel within the wheel, that nobody can really tell us what all that means. I think, I'm not smarter than anybody else, but I think that wheel within a wheel, it's a vision that God is giving Ezekiel, and we have to try to understand it. But it seems, as you look at the whole context of the book, that thing, whatever it was that Ezekiel was describing in chapter 1, it's the throne of God. And he is describing that throne as being lifted from Jerusalem and then lifted from Judea. He's departing. God is withdrawing his presence from these Jews who would not remain in covenant relationship with him, who continued to thumb their nose at the covenant that God had with them. So he withdraws his presence from them. Now you think about that we'll just take it from a Christian's perspective, a place where God is not. And we say God is everywhere, but there are places that you could go in this world where the presence of God obviously is not. And you see the chaos, the pain, the suffering, the depravity that's there. Well, God said, I'm leaving Jerusalem. It's so bad. It's so sinful. It's so depraved. I cannot be there anymore. Let me show you how God describes this in Ezekiel chapter 5. Thus says the Lord God, this is Jerusalem. I have set her in the midst of nations, and the countries are all around her. And she has rebelled against my judgment by doing wickedness more than the nations, and against my statutes more than the countries that are all around her. We think of the Gentiles not being in covenant relationship and the Jews being in covenant relationship. God says the Gentiles are better than the Jews. They were supposed to be in covenant relationship with me. For they have refused my judgments and have not walked in my statutes. Therefore, thus says Jehovah God, because you have multiplied disobedience more than the nations that are around you, have not walked in my statutes have not walked in my statutes, nor kept my judgments, nor even done according to the judgments of the nations all around you. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, indeed, I am against you. I'm not keeping up with, I am. I am against you and will execute judgments in your midst in the sight of the nations. I will do nothing among you I will do among you what I have never done, and the like of which I will never do again, because of your abominations. Therefore, fathers shall eat their sons in your midst, and sons shall eat their fathers, and I will execute judgments among you, and all of you who remain I will scatter with the winds. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord, surely because you have defiled my sanctuary with your detestable things and with your abominations, therefore I will diminish you. My eye will not spare, nor will I have any pity. 1/3 of you shall die of the pestilence and be consumed with famine in your midst. 1/3 shall fall by the sword around you, and I will scatter another third to all the winds, and I will draw out the sword after them. Thus shall my anger be spent, and I will cause my fury
to rest upon them.
To rest upon them, and I will be avenged. Thank you. And they shall know that I, Jehovah, have spoken it in my zeal when I have spent my fury upon them. Moreover, I will make you a waste and a reproach among the nations that are around you in the sight of all who pass by. So it shall be a reproach, a taunt, a lesson, and an astonishment to the nations that are around you when I execute judgment among you in anger and in fury and in furious rebukes. I, the Lord, have spoken. Where I send against them the terrible arrows of famine, which shall be for destruction, which I will send to destroy you, I will increase the famine upon you and cut off your supply of bread. So I will send against you famine and wild beast, and they will bereave you. Pestilence and blood shall pass through you, and I will bring the sword against you. I, the Lord, have spoken. Now, that is an ugly, ugly passage.
Yep.
What does it look like to you as you read and think about what he is saying there? There are some horrible things there. What does it look like to you?
God is telling them what their future is about to be, and it is not bright at all. It is.
Light doesn't come into the subject. What? Now, I want you to feel this, and this is where I was trying to get to. I want you to put yourself in their shoes just for a moment. Hear these words. I mean, he talked about fathers eating their children and children eating their fathers. That's desperate hunger.
Yes.
Be surrounded by the Babylonian army for a long time, and when they're surrounded, no food is coming in, no one is going out. So eventually, I think it was
famine in the land. So he said nothing is coming in.
The prophet said that a quarter, I forget what the measurement was, a quarter of a cab of dove's dung would go for so much money. And I don't know what they used the dung for. I don't know if they ate it or they used it to cook with. I don't know. But selling dove's dung, that's how desperate you are.
Yeah.
Jawbone of an ass would be sold for so much money. Now I forget how much it was, but it's just showing how desperately hungry people became. So that's the situation.
Wow.
Put yourself in that situation. What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
Oh, that's the worst. That's about the worst it gets on this side. That's the worst of the worst.
It's just incomprehensible. It's not really possible. If you could pull up on your internet some of the pictures from the Jewish concentration camps back in World War II.
Oh, yes.
That's what you're looking at.
I'll just say, I can barely even deal. I can barely stand.
It's awful to look at. And that's what those Jews in Jerusalem looked like during this time. They were that
desperate.
Hungry.
Yeah.
Weak, sick. And this is the lament. This is what the man who wrote Lamentations, this is what he's feeling. The lament of Lamentations 2 is acknowledging God's right to do what he's doing.
Yeah.
But knowing that did not keep him from asking God for compassion.
Yeah.
Lamentations 3 sort of breaks the pattern. In Lamentations 1 and 2, God or the writer takes the A, B, C, D, E, F, G of the Hebrew alphabet and begins each line with a different character. In Lamentations 3, he does that again, but he does it in a different way. It's it's one character for every third verse.
Okay.
Whereas there's 22 alphabet letters in their alphabet. In chapters 1, you got 22 verses. In chapter 2, you got 22 verses. In chapter 3, you got 66 verses. So it's the 22 times 3. And so he does the same thing. He just does it in a different form. Really, again, it's a separate poem on theme with the other two, but it's a separate poem in an acrostic. And the author actually incorporates the lament of other men. He goes back to Job and he quotes from Job. He goes to Isaiah and he quotes from Isaiah. And he uses some of the laments in the Psalms. So he takes the laments of other men and uses it here in his situation. In the poem, the voice is that of a lonely man who's speaking out of his suffering as one would be suffering in that situation like we just read in Ezekiel. And his grief, and he represents the grief and suffering of the whole nation. And again, like chapter 2, he sees his hardship as a part of God's justice, but also as a paradox. This is where the poet gives us hope. In chapter 3, it's the only chapter in Lamentations that hope is given. In chapter 3, you may know this song. We've made it into a song today. He says in verse 21, "This I recall to my mind, therefore I have hope. Though the Lord's mercies are through the Lord's mercies, we are not consumed, because his compassions, they fail not. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, the soul who seeks him. It is good for one who should hope and wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." So you've sung that song, haven't you? I saw you mouthing the words. "Lord is my portion, says my soul, therefore I will hope in him." That's where that song comes from.
Okay. Isn't that repeated in New Testament too?
If it is, it's in the book of Ephesians, but I can't think if that's
okay.
That's right.
Okay, okay, because I remember reading something
similar there. There is a song. Paul used songs on more than one occasions in his letters, and Ephesians is one of them. And I think there was a song that was sung among the Christians at that time that Paul quoted. So this poet's reasoning in his third poem is that if God is consistent enough to bring justice on human evil, then we can count on him to be consistent on keeping his covenant promise. If you are faithful, yes, you may be suffering with the guilty. Sometimes the innocent do suffer with the guilty. But if you are faithful, God, there's hope. God will keep his promise. We can anticipate that God will not allow evil to have the final word. Mm-hmm. Look at Lamentations 3 as the poet saying that God's judgment is the seedbed of hope for the future. Bad as things were, and they were bad. Just look at Ezekiel. They were bad. And I think that's an amazing perspective of life in general, that this man, in the midst of that chaos, in the midst of that pain, in the midst of all that turmoil and death and just the stench of sin all around him, he said, I can see hope. Mm-hmm. Because if God will do that, if he's faithful to bring justice, he will also be faithful to bring mercy and hope. Lamentations 4, I know I'm going into a lot of detail here, but I think it's important.
Yes.
Lamentations 4 is a depiction of the siege of Jerusalem, how it actually went down. And just like what we read in Ezekiel, it's not pretty. Yeah. In contrast to the way things used to be, he shows us the way things are. He said it used to be the children were playing in the streets, now they beg for food. The wealthy used to eat lavish meals, now they grub in the dirt, looking for something to find in the dirt to eat. The royal leaders used to be full of splendor and glory, but now they're famished and dirty and hardly recognizable. And then in chapter 5, I think chapter 5 is next, yeah. It's a different kind of poem. Same author, same theme, but it's a different kind of poem. Where in chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, we saw the acrostic organization, a lot of work, a lot of detail. Chapter 5, not so much. No acrostic pattern. And when the readers who originally read this, now you and I can't see it, but when those people who read it in Hebrew read it for the first time, they saw the acrostic in chapter 1. They saw the acrostic in chapter 2. They saw the acrostic in chapter 3 and chapter 4. When they get to 5, they say, oh, what happened? It's not there anymore. And the author brings that lack of order into his message of the lament. There's a lack of order. Just like there's much order in chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, there's a lack of it in chapter 5. It's like the poet can't hold it together anymore, and just grief explodes into chaos, and it looks like chaos and disorder. This poem is a prayer for mercy. It's a communal prayer for mercy. Israel begs God to not ignore their sufferings and abandon them. The poem offers a long list of different kinds of people who are devastated by the fall of Jerusalem. He'll talk about mothers and fathers and elders and princes and sons and daughters. And it expresses their laments, their cries. You could say that the message of this book is that suffering in silence is not a virtue. Don't do it.
Right.
Keep it in and it'll eat you up.
Yep.
Let it out. Ever how it comes out, let it out. Don't not curb your tongue, but still let it out. They are encouraged not to deny their emotions, not to deny their voice and their protest, to vent their feelings and pour them out even before God. From a purely psychological perspective, this is a tutorial on how to grieve, and God is the one teaching. The book ends with a paradox. The poem shows God as the eternal king of the world, but he also acknowledges that the people's circumstance make them feel like God is nowhere around. And it ends with a clear, or without giving a clear answer to the tension that they were all feeling. And it's left, you might say, unresolved. look at verse, well, I can get it up. 21. There, turn us back to you, O Lord, and we will be restored. Renew us, or renew our days as of old, unless you have utterly rejected us and are very angry with us. So they have no, it ends without a resolution.
Right.
The poet doesn't leave us with a nice, neat conclusion. And that's sort of like our own experiences with pain, suffering, and grief, isn't it?
Yep.
When we go through that difficult time, there's not always an answer. There's not always, we'll not always find a, well, this is why that is, and I'll get my justice. Mm-hmm. If we're righteous, if we remain faithful to God, we will be rewarded, but it's not necessarily so in this life.
Right.
Jesus was the most righteous of all, and he died.
Yep.
A wicked, horrible death. Not wicked, he wasn't wicked, but
our wickedness. Yeah.
Our wickedness, a horrible death. And you look at some of the prophets of old that the Hebrew writer talks about how some of them were stoned to death, some of them were placed upon an altar and cut in half. And these were faithful, godly men. Yep. Where's the justice in that? Well, the justice is on the other side of the grave. They just couldn't see it at the time.
Yeah.
But they knew it.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Bible doesn't end with Lamentations. We, unlike the poet who wrote it, we can see the rest of the story. As you study the book of Chronicles, you're studying the rest of the story that the poet didn't see. He didn't see the end of the matter. He only felt the pain of being, in his mind, forsaken by God, and he's expressing that pain. Mm-hmm. If he was astute to what the prophets had said before him, he knew why this was happening. That didn't make it better. It still hurt. The pain was still there. And it's a very important book, Lamentations is, to show us how to cry, to show us how prayer and grief are a crucial part of our faith journey in this broken world. Again, this is not a class on Lamentations. We're scheduled to study the book of Psalms. And the psalm that we're going to look at tonight is a lament. But I wanted us to take time to look at the lament of Jeremiah to prepare us for the lament of Asaph. And to help us do that, I wanted to spend some time reading so that you and I can get a feel for the situation. I want you to feel Psalm 74. I want you to feel how he felt. In order to do that, I want to, as much as I can, take you back 2,500 years and put yourselves in the context in which he lived. And the only way I can do that is by going back to the scriptures and seeing what that was like, and try to bring that feeling, that emotion into your life so that we can then approach Psalm 74 and see what he was feeling. So before reading the lament of Asaph, I want to read Jeremiah's lament. We've talked about it, but we haven't read it. I want to read Jeremiah's lament in Lamentations it's from the same period of time. But before doing that, I want to set the historical context by reading about the end of the Jewish kingdom that's found in the book of 2 Kings. It is 7:30. I'm going to take a break here. We're going to come back and do a lot of reading. I'm going to have it on the screen, but it might be easier if you have your Bibles with you to do that, so that if I don't keep up with it on the screen, you can keep it on your Bible or whatever it is that you use for a Bible. I'll try to keep up with it on the screen. The problem with the screen is there's this bar on my screen that tells me what I'm supposed to be doing in Zoom. It gets in my way and I have to move it around, and when I move it around, I lose my place.
No problem.
I want to come back and we're going to read some in 2 Kings, and then we're going to read the book of Lamentations.
All right.
not a hard read. It's an easy read, but it will be lengthy. And I may get you to help me.
Okay.
We may take turns reading, but I want you to feel the poem, not just read it. I want you to feel the poem. So let's take a break. We'll come back at 7:31. So let's make it 20 till, and we'll come back and do some reading. What's your little dog's name? I see him walking around there once in a while.
Sugar.
Sugar.
Little bad Sugar.
Yeah. What kind of dog is it? I can't tell from here.
It's a mix between a Jack Russell and a Dachshund.
Okay.
A little wiener. Kind of like a little wiener. And she is full of personality.
Mm.
Ooh, I tell you.
I think that's appropriate. Full of personality.
Yes, but they only take a liking to one person, and that's it.
Really?
Yes, she hates my husband.
You don't like your husband? No. That's not a good thing.
They argue all the time.
Who wins those arguments?
It just depends. Sometimes he don't feel like being bothered with us. He let her have it.
Lisa, are you back?
She probably on mute. Lisa, you on mute, honey?
Absolutely. Y'all already know.
We'll get started then. 2 Kings chapter 25.
Okay.
I think I have it up here. There it is. And I'll try to keep up with it, and I won't guarantee it, though. 2 Kings 25. Now it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and all of his army came against Jerusalem and encamped against it. And they built a siege against the wall all around. Siege, I don't know if you know what that means, but they basically built a ramp all the way around the wall so that eventually they're going to climb over that ramp and over the wall. But at least for now, they've got the city surrounded. No one comes in, no one goes out. The first few months, that's no big deal. After a while, it becomes a big deal. They encamped around Jerusalem, built a siege wall against it all around. So the city was besieged until the 11th year of Zedekiah. By the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine had become so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. I'm trying to get my mouse to work. Come on, wake up. Then the city wall was broken through, and all the men of war fled by way of the gate between the two walls, which was by the king's garden, even though the Chaldeans were still encamped all around the city, and the king went by the way of the plain. But the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king, and they overtook him in the plain of Jericho. All of his army was scattered from him, so they took the king, brought him to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and they pronounced judgment on him. They killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put the eyes of Zedekiah out, bound him with bronze fetters, and took him to Babylon. So the last thing he saw was his sons being killed, and then they put out his eyes. Verse 8, and in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, which is the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord. What are we talking about, the house of the Lord?
The temple.
Temple. He burned the temple of the Lord. And I lost my place. Where was it?
9. Let's see.
He burned the house of the Lord, thank you, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, that is, all the houses of the great, he burned with fire. And all the army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down the walls of Jerusalem all around. Verse 11, then Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive the rest of the people who remained in the city, and the defectors who had deserted to the king of Babylon with the rest of the multitude. But the captain of the guard left some of the poor of the land as vine dressers and farmers. The bronze pillars that were in the house of the Lord, and the carts and the bronze seat that were in the house of the Lord, the Chaldeans broke in pieces, carried away the bronze to Babylon. They also took away the pots, the shovels, the trimmers, the spoons, the bronze utensils with which the priest ministered, fire pans, the basins, the things of solid gold and silver the captain of the guard took away. You might recall that some years later, the Belshazzar in the book of Daniel took those same utensils and defiled them, using them in his worship or his drinking party that he had. And that night, that was his last. Anyway.
Nope.
Verse 16. The two pillars, 1C, and the cart which Solomon had made for the house of the Lord, the bronze and all these articles were beyond measure. The height of one pillar was 18 cubits, and on the capital of it was bronze. The height of the capital was 3 cubits, and the network and the pomegranates all around the capital were bronze. The second pillar was the same with the network. And the captain of the guard took Sariah, the chief priest, Zephaniah, the second priest, and the 3 doorkeepers. He also took out of the city an officer who had charge of men of war, 5 men, the king's close associates who were found in the city, the chief recruiting officer of the army who mustered the people of the land. 60 men of the people of the land were found in the city. So Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, took these and brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. The king of Babylon struck them, put them to death at Riblah in the land of Hamath. Thus Judah was carried away captive from its own land. So this is a picture of what's taking place in Jerusalem. It's not a pretty picture, right? People are hungry. People are starving. The royalty's being put to death. And it's just an awful picture. And that's what the writer of the book of Lamentations and the writer of Psalm 74, they're both living through this. Maybe from different perspectives, but they're both living through these events. So let's turn to the book of Lamentations. Again, we're going to read the whole book, and if you don't mind, we'll take turns reading it. And as we're reading,
Brother Mike, that Zephaniah that they took right here, is that the same Zephaniah in Old Testament?
I mean, the second, this is Zephaniah the priest.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I don't know if this is any relation to anybody else that we know in the scriptures. It's kind of hard to tell because the father and mother or mother are not given. We don't know much more about them than what we have here. The point here is they took the chief priest, Sariah, and the second priest, Zephaniah,
gotcha.
And, killed him.
Gotcha.
He's doing away with their religion.
Yep.
That's a big deal in any culture, but especially in the Jewish culture. They've lived this religion for 1,000 years or more.
Yeah.
As we look at Zephaniah, now, Lamentations, let's try to keep the mental picture that I've tried to make tonight of devastation, hunger, desperate loss. People are watching their children being killed. They're watching their parents being killed. They're watching their relatives or whomever being taken off into captivity. And they, if I recall correctly, in some of the inscriptions, Babylonian inscriptions, they were taken in chains. And they weren't chained hand to hand and so forth. They had a chain in their jaw.
Ooh.
The chain in the jaw, or the hook in the jaw, was hooked to the person in front of them, and that's how they went. And they went across the Fertile Crescent, and probably about 500 miles. That's how they went. And it's just you weren't blessed if you were taken. You weren't blessed if you were left. It was a horrible, horrible existence. And I want us to keep that in mind as we read what this author is saying in the book of Lamentations. Who wants to read Lamentations chapter 1?
Sure.
It's an acrostic, but you won't see it because it's in English, and so you'll miss that part of it. But I think we'll still get the gist of it. I think I have it on the screen.
Okay. Lamentations 1. How doth the city sit solitary that was full of people? How is she become as a widow, she that was great among the nations, the princes among the provinces? How is she become tributary? She weepeth sore in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she hath none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They are become her enemies. Judah is gone into captivity because of affliction and because of great servitude. She dwelleth among the heathen. She finds no rest. All her persecutors overtook her between the straits. The ways of Zion do mourn, because none come to the solemn feast. All her gates are desolate. Her priests sigh, her virgins are afflicted, and she is in bitterness. Her adversaries are the chief. Her enemies prosper, for the Lord hath afflicted her for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children are gone into captivity before the enemy, and from the daughter of Zion all her beauty is departed. Her princes are become like harts that find no pasture, and they are gone without strength before the pursuer. Jerusalem remembered in the days of her affliction and of her miseries all her pleasant things that she had in the days of old, when her people fell into the hand of the enemy, and none did help her. The adversary saw her and did mock at her Sabbaths. Jerusalem have grievously sinned, therefore she is removed. All that honored her despise her, because they have seen her nakedness. Yea, she sigheth and turns backwards. Her filthiness is in her skirts. She remembers not her last end. Therefore she came down wonderfully. She had no comforter. O Lord, behold my affliction, for the enemy have magnified himself. The adversary has spread out his hand upon all her pleasant things, for she has seen that the heathen entered into her sanctuary, whom thou didst command that they should not enter into thy congregation. All her people sigh, they seek bread. They have given their pleasant things for meat to relieve their soul. See, O Lord, and consider, for I am become vile. Is it nothing to you, all ye that pass by? Behold, and see if there be any sorrow like unto my sorrow, which is done unto me, wherewith the Lord have afflicted me in the days of his fierce anger. From above hath he sent fire into my bones, and it prevaileth against them. He has spread a net for my feet. He have turned me back. He have made me desolate and faint all the day. The yoke of my transgressions is bound by his hand. They are weathered and come up upon my neck. He have made my strength to fall. The Lord have delivered me into their hands, from whom I am not able to rise up. The Lord have trodden underfoot all my mighty men in the midst of me. He hath called an assembly against me to crush my young men. The Lord hath trodden the virgin, the daughter of Judah, as in a winepress. For these things I weep. Mine eye runneth down the water, because the comforter that should relieve my soul is far from me. My children are desolate, because the enemy prevailed. Zion spreadeth forth her hands, and there is none to comfort her. The Lord hath commanded concerning Jacob that his adversaries should be round about him. Jerusalem is as a menstruous woman among them. The Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his commandments. Hear, I pray you, all people, and behold my sorrow. My virgins and my young men are gone into captivity. I called for my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and my elders gave up the ghost in the city, while they sought their meat to relieve their soul. Behold, O Lord, for I am in distress. My bowels are troubled. My heart is turned within me, for I have grievously rebelled. Abroad the sword bereaveth. At home there is a death. They have heard that I sigh. There is none to comfort me. All mine enemies have heard of my trouble. They are glad that thou hast done it. Thou wilt bring the day that thou hast called, and they shall be like unto me. Let all their wickedness come before thee, and do unto them as thou hast done unto me for all my transgressions, for my sighs are many, and my heart is faint.
What do you think about what you just read there?
Whew. Yeah, That's pitiful. That's a pitiful predicament to be in. Everybody is gone. Nobody can protect you. It's desolate, destruction all the way around. There's no, hope really, because the judgment has been handed down. I know what, it's like they're saying, I know I did wrong, and so all I can say is please just, help me, Lord, because I'm in dire restraints here.
He's in distress.
Yes.
He says that people are dying all around me. It's just an awful situation. And as we read that, we just need to feel his pain, if I can use that terminology. His pain.
The fear, the pain, the discomfort, like it's despair.
It's horrible. Lisa, you want to read for us?
I will do it.
Ready?
In chapter 2. How hath the Lord covered the daughter of Zion with a cloud in his anger, and cast down from heaven unto the earth the beauty of Israel, and remembered not his footstool in the day of his anger. The Lord hath swallowed up all habitations of Jacob, and hath not pitied. He hath thrown down in his wrath the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. He hath brought them down to the ground. He hath polluted the kingdom and the princes thereof. He hath cut off in his fierce anger all the horn of Israel. He hath drawn back in his right and from before the enemy. And he burned against Jacob like a flaming fire, which devoured round about. He hath bent his bow like an enemy. He stood with his right hand as an adversary, and slew all that were pleasant to the eye in the tabernacle of the daughter of Zion. He poured out his fury like fire. The Lord was an enemy. He had swallowed up Israel. He had swallowed up all her palaces. He had destroyed his strongholds and have increased in the in the daughter of Judah mourning and lamentation. And he hath violently taken away his tabernacle as if it were of a garden. He hath destroyed his places of assembly. The Lord has caused the solemn feasts and Sabbaths to be forgotten in Zion, and hath despised in the indignation of his anger the king and the priest. The Lord hath cast off his altar. He hath abhorred his sanctuary. He hath given up into the hand of the enemy the walls of her palaces. They have made a noise in the house of the Lord, and as in the day of a solemn feast. The Lord had purposed to destroy the wall of the daughter of Zion. He had stretched out a line. He had not withdrawn his hand from destroying. Therefore, he made the rampart and the wall to lament. They languished together. Her gates are sunk into the ground. He hath destroyed and broken her bars. The king and her princes are among the Gentiles. The law is no more. Her prophets also find no vision from the Lord. The elders of the daughter of Zion sit upon the ground and keep silence. They have cast up dust upon their heads. They have girded themselves with sackcloth. The virgins of Jerusalem hang down their heads to the ground. Mine eyes do fail with tears. My bowels are troubled. My liver is poured upon the earth for the destruction of the daughter of my people, because the children and the suckling swoon in the streets of the city. They say to their mothers, where is corn and wine? When they swoon as the wounded in the streets of the city, when their soul was poured out onto their mother's bosom. What things shall I take to witness for thee? What things shall I liken to thee, O daughter of Jerusalem? What shall I equal to thee, that I may comfort thee, O virgin daughter of Zion? For thy breach is great like the sea. Who can heal thee? The prophets have seen vain and foolish things for thee, and they have not discovered thine iniquity to turn away the captivity, but have seen for thee false burdens and causes of banishment. All that pass by clap their hands at thee. They hiss and wag their head at the daughter of Jerusalem, saying, is this the city that men call the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth. All thine enemies have opened their mouth against thee. They hiss and gnash the teeth, they say. We have swallowed her up. Certainly, this is the day that we look for. We have found, we have seen it. The Lord hath done that which he had devised. He hath fulfilled his word that he had commanded in the days of old. He hath thrown down, he hath not pitied, and he hath caused thine enemy to rejoice over thee. He hath set up the horn of thine adversaries. Their heart cried unto the Lord. O wall of the daughter of Zion, let tears run down like a river day and night. Give thyself no rest. Let not the apple of thine eyes cease. Arise, cry out in the night at the beginning of the watches. Pour out thine heart like water before the face of the Lord. Lift up thine hands toward him for the life of thy young children that faint for hunger in the top of every street. Behold the Lord, and consider to whom thou hast done this. Shall the women eat their fruit, and children of a span long? Shall the priests and prophets be slain in the sanctuary of the Lord? The young and the old lie on the ground in the streets. My virgins and young men are fallen by the sword. Thou hast slain them in the day of mine anger. Thou hast killed and not pitied. Thou hast called as in a solemn day my terrors round about. So that in the day of the Lord's anger, none escape nor remain. Those that I have swallowed and brought up with thine enemy consumed. Wow.
Not a pleasant sight. I am a man who has seen affliction by the rod of his wrath. He has led me and made me walk in darkness and not in light. Surely he has turned his hand against me time and time again throughout the day. He has aged my flesh and my skin and my broken bones. He has besieged me and surrounded me with bitterness and woe. He has set me in dark places like the dead of long ago. He has hedged me in so that I cannot get out. He has made me or my chain heavy. Even when I cry and shout, he shuts out my prayer. He has blocked my ways with hewn stone. He has made my paths crooked. He has been to me a bear lying in wait, a lion in the ambush. He has turned aside my ways and torn me in pieces. He has made me desolate. He has bent his bow and set me up as a target for the arrow. He has caused the arrows of his quiver to pierce my loins. I have become the ridicule of my people, their taunting song all the day. He has filled me with bitterness. He has made me drink wormwood. He has also broken my teeth with gravel. He has covered me with ashes. You have moved my feet or my soul far from peace. I have forgotten prosperity. As I said, my strength and my hope have perished from the Lord. Remember my affliction and my roaming, the wormwood and the gall. My soul still remembers and sinks within me. This I recall to my mind. Therefore I have hope. Through the Lord's mercies, we are not consumed because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should hope and wait quietly. Wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man to bear with the yoke of his youth, or the yoke in his youth. Let him sit alone and keep silent because God has laid it on him. Let him put his mouth in the dust, there may yet be hope. Let him give his cheek to the one who strikes him and be full of reproach, for the Lord will not cast off forever. Though he causes grief, yet he will show compassion according to the multitude of his mercies. For he did not afflict willingly, nor grieve the children of men to crush under one's feet all the prisoners of the earth, to turn aside the justice due of men before the face of the Most High, or subvert a man in his cause. The Lord does not approve. Who is he who speaks and it comes to pass when the Lord has not commanded it? Is it not from the mouth of the Most High that woe and well-being proceed? Why should a living man complain, a man for the punishment of his sins? Let us search and examine our ways and turn back to the Lord. Let us lift our hearts and hands to God in heaven. We have transgressed and rebelled. You have not pardoned. You have covered yourself with anger and pursued us. You have slain and not pitied. You have covered yourself with a cloud that prayer should not pass through. You may have made us an offscouring and refuse in the midst of the peoples. All of our enemies have opened their mouths against us. Fear and the snare have come upon us, desolation and destruction. My eyes overflow with rivers of water for the destruction of the daughter of my people. My eyes flow and do not cease without interruption, till the Lord from heaven looks down and sees. My eyes bring suffering to my soul because of all the daughters of my city. My eyes without cause hunted me down like a bird. They silence my life in the pit and threw stones at me. The waters flow over my head. I said, I am cut off. I called upon your name, O Jehovah. From the lowest pit, you have heard my voice. Do not hide your ear from sighing, from my cry for help. You draw near on the day that I called you and said, do not fear. O Lord, you have pleaded the case for my soul. You have redeemed my life. O Lord, you have seen how I am wronged. Judge my case. You have seen all their vengeance, all their schemes against me. You have heard their reproach, O Lord, all their schemes against me. Their lips are the lips of my enemies, with their whispering against me all the day. Look at their sitting down and their rising up. I am their taunting song. Repay them, O Lord, according to the work of their hands. Give them a veiled heart. Your curse be upon them. In your anger pursue and destroy them from under the heavens of the Lord. Ontario, you want to pick up?
Yeah, sure. Lamentations 4. How is the gold become dim? How is the most fine gold changed? The stones of the sanctuary are poured out in the top of every street. The precious sons of Zion, comparable to fine gold. How are they esteemed as earthly pictures, the work of the hands of the potter? Even the sea monsters draw out the beast. They give suck to their young ones. The daughter of my people is become cruel, like the ostriches in the wilderness. The tongue of the suckling child cleaves to the roof of his mouth for thirst. The young children ask bread, and no man breaks it unto them. They that did feed delicately are desolate in the streets. They that were brought up in scarlet embrace dunghills. For the punishment of the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the punishment of the sin of Sodom, that was overthrown as in a moment, and no hand stayed on her. Her Nazarites were purer than snow. They were whiter than milk. They were more ruddy in body than rubies. Their polishing was of sapphire. Their visage is blacker than a coal. They are not known in the streets. Their skin cleaves to their bones. It is withered. It is become like a stick. They that be slain with the sword are better than they that be slain with hunger. For these pine away, stricken though for want of the fruits of the field. The hands of the pitiful woman have sought in their own children. They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people. The Lord have accomplished his fury. He have poured out his fierce anger and have kindled a fire in Zion, and he has devoured the foundations thereof. The kings of the earth and all the inhabitants of the world would not have believed that the adversary and the enemy should have entered into the gates of Jerusalem. For the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests that have shed the blood of the just in the midst of her. They have wandered as blind men in the streets. They have polluted themselves with blood so that men could not touch their garments. They cried unto them, depart ye. It is unclean. Depart, depart, touch not. When they fled away and wandered, they said among the heathens, they shall no more sojourn there. The anger of the Lord have divided them. He will no more regard them. They respected not the persons of the priests. They favored not the elders. As for us, our eyes as yet fell for our vain help. In our watching, we have watched for a nation that could not save us. They hunt our steps that we cannot go in our streets. Our end is near. Our days are fulfilled, for our end is come. Our persecutors are swifter than the eagles of the heaven. They pursued us upon the mountains. They laid wait for us in the wilderness. The breath of our nostrils, the anointed of the Lord, was taken in their pits, of whom we said, under his shadow, we shall live among the heathen. Rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, that dwells in the land of Uz. The cup also shall pass through unto thee. Thou shalt be drunken and shalt make thyself naked. The punishment of thine iniquity is accomplished. O daughter of Zion, he will no more carry thee away into captivity. He will visit thine iniquity. O daughter of Edom, he will discover thy sins.
Lisa, you want to try it again?
Chapter 5. Remember, O Lord, what has come upon us. Consider and behold our reproach. Our inheritance is turned to strangers, our houses to aliens. We are orphans and fatherless. Our mothers are as widows. We have drunken our water for money. Our wood is sold unto us. Our necks are under persecution. We labor and have no rest. We have given the hand to the Egyptians and to the Syrians to be satisfied with bread. Our fathers have sinned and are not, and we have borne their iniquities. Servants have ruled over us. There is none that doth deliver us out of their land, out of their hand. We get our bread with the peril of our lives because of the sword of the wilderness. Our skin was black like an oven because of the terrible famine. They ravished the women in Zion and the maids in the cities of Judah. Princes are hanged up by their hand. The faces of elders were not honored. They took the young men to grind, and the children fell up under the wood. The elders have ceased from the gate, the young men from their music. The joy of our heart is ceasing. The joy of our heart is ceased. Our dance is turned into mourning. The crown is fallen from our head. Woe unto us that we have sinned. For this our heart is faint. For these things our eyes are dim. Because of the mountain of Zion, which is desolate, the foxes walk upon it. Thou, O Lord, remainest forever. Thy throne from generation to generations. Wherefore dost thou forget us forever and forsake us so long time? Turn thou us unto thee, O Lord, and we shall be renew our days as of old. But thou hast utterly rejected us. Thou art very wroth against us.
I know it's a lot of reading and a lot of sad reading. What are your thoughts as you come to the end of that and go through that with the prophet and feel what he's feeling, see what he's seeing? What are your thoughts?
You know, that's it's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to actually see that day has come. I can't even imagine the horror, you know, that he is experiencing by watching this, you know what I mean? And being there, seeing helplessly watching this destruction happen. Can't stop it, can't slow it down. You know what I mean? No help in sight, no ceasing in sight. It's just a bad situation.
It's bad. He has a great love for his people, and he's watching them go through this. He's actually going through it himself, but he's watching them go through this. And Jeremiah is called the weeping prophet, and I get it. You know, seeing, even if you have little feeling for the people, to see a people going through this, it's got to wrench your heart. But he has great feeling for these people. And it's not only them that's going through it, he's going through it. So we've all felt confusion in our life. We've had those times when we don't understand why this is happening in our life. Maybe not as desperately as Jeremiah felt it, but we've had those times in our life that, why am I going through this? Why do I have to go through this? I thought being a Christian would keep me from having to go through these kind of things. We've experienced times of great joy, but we live in a world that's plagued with the consequences of sin. Whether it's our sin or someone else's, we live in a world that's plagued with the consequences of sin. And those consequences sometimes pour over into our lives and bring us pain, sometimes unbelievable pain. Pain that keeps us up at night. Pain that sends us to the pantry or to the refrigerator so that we can drown our sorrows in food or ice cream. It's pain that brings us to the bridge at night. Pain that brings us to the point that we're holding a gun in our hands. People experience these things. Mm-hmm. People have felt that. And without God, we don't know how to deal with it. There are obviously some wrong ways to deal with pain and confusion. If for no other reason, we have these songs, these poems from God to help us to learn better how to do it, learn more how acceptably to deal with, and in non-harmful ways to deal with these very, very strong emotions. As we turn to Psalm 74 now, we're actually going to get to it.
And here we also see and we can see God's supremacy here in our areas.
Mm-hmm. I didn't catch that, Lisa.
You were saying, was you saying his providence? We see his providence.
We see God not on his providence, but we see his supremacy, his sovereignty, that he is over all, even in good times and bad times. It teaches us to trust him and to lean on him as his promises we see as sure. Not even though we may not understand things, and we probably won't understand a lot of things, but one thing we do understand, and we know him, we know again that his promises are sure. Don't lean on your own understandings. Go to God in time of need. Even, most people, when the sun is shining and things are happy, everybody loves the winter, we love the Lord. But who do we go to? How do we deal when the sun is not shining and we're having problems, or we have the storm, or God gives you something and then you put what he gives you before him? How do we act then? Do we still love the Lord when his troubles abound?
That's right. That's what these songs are about, Lisa, and you've gotten the point from it, and I appreciate you bringing that out. We need to trust in God, sunshine or storm, and know that he can get us through. And that's the psalmist, the writer of Lamentations. They were going through a terrible, terrible storm, and yes, they did, you might say, accuse God or lay it at God's feet. But with further reflection, I think they understand why it was happening. But even with that understanding, it doesn't take away the pain. Yeah. Especially in a very, we can describe several situations that we've been through in our own lives. Mm-hmm. Knowing that God is there in sunshine or rain is good, but it doesn't take away the pain. And these songs are to help us deal with that in a safe way, a way that doesn't bring harm or more disaster or chaos into our lives. Mm-hmm. Good point. Good thoughts. So now let's turn to Psalm 74. As we open the psalm, it's immediately were confronted with the sadness of the psalm. It's like Lamentations. It is a national lament of the Jews. It expresses pain and grief that the writer felt concerning the destruction and desolation of his nation. Almost in its entirety, it's a sorrowful song, a psalm of pity. It's like a dirge, a funeral dirge. Something terrible has happened to God's people. They have experienced a tragedy of unparalleled dimensions, and they were overwhelmed with sorrow. Jerusalem had fallen in a state of perpetual ruin, it says in verse 3. Ezra and Nehemiah will deal with these ruins still 100 years later. At the time of the psalmist, he's either witnessing it or has just witnessed it. But even 100 years later, those problems are still there. When you might remember you'll find it in your study of Chronicles, when they came back and they were rebuilding the temple, the old men who saw the original temple wept because it was nothing compared to what the temple was before Nebuchadnezzar destroyed it. This is not just a war-torn area to these people. That would have been bad enough. This is the destruction of the very core of their culture as a people. Their lives, their faith, their religion for generations were centered around Jerusalem and what Jerusalem stood for in their minds and their hearts. You and I, we have an attachment to our church buildings. We've been going to that church building now for 30 or 40 years. And this is that, but it's multiplied times the 10th power. It's just, I don't think we can feel toward our church buildings what they felt toward their homeland and their temple of Jerusalem. Their church building was not struck by lightning or a tornado. It was struck by God, their God, the God that their people had been, in their minds, devoted to for centuries. And now this God says, you're more despicable than the nations that surround you. Habakkuk, in his prophecy, said, God, what are you going to do about these wicked people of yours? And God said, well, I'm going to bring the Babylonians against them. And Habakkuk says, whoa, not that. Anything but that. Have mercy, O Lord. And in this song of Asaph, we talked about Asaph last week. This is probably not the Asaph that wrote Psalm 73. This is probably the sons of Asaph. Could be actual kin to him or just people who were trained by the Asaphian music people in the temple. But whoever it was, he had some connection to Asaph. And he tells us the temple has been destroyed. The prophets are gone, verse 9. The enemy has overcome them. The enemy was the ones controlling their land as foreigners in their own land. These people began finally doing what they should have done centuries before. They began looking to God, but it's in despair. Not in worship so much, but as in despair. Asking him to place his hand of favor upon them again. Begging for something that they didn't deserve. God had given them opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, but they thumbed their nose at him. And now he brings this devastation upon them, and he says, I will not turn. So from beginning to end, this psalm projects the ravaged condition of Jerusalem. There is debate as to whether this is the cry of those being transported to Babylon during the time of the destruction, or is this the cry of those who are already in Babylon with Ezekiel, who have gotten news from Jerusalem that it's destroyed. Jerusalem is destroyed. The homeland is gone. Or is this the poor who were left in the land by Nebuchadnezzar, who lived with this destruction for several 100 years? You ever heard the song By the Rivers of Babylon?
I don't think so.
It's probably written by somebody else, but it's a quotation from the Psalm 137. And the first time I heard it, I was standing in a little Russian shop, and somebody had, I don't know if it's piped in music or had a disc playing or whatever, but this song was playing, and it was in English. I recognized it immediately because I only heard Russian over there, and anytime I heard English, my ears popped up. And so it was by a group called Bonnie M.
Okay.
You can Google it. It's an interesting little song. I'm not going to sing it for you. I'll let you see words if I can find it. Where is it? Come on now. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, and there we wept as we remembered Zion. Oh, the wicked carried us away captivity, required from us a song. How shall we sing King Alpha's song in a strange land? So let the words of our mouth and the meditations of our heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord. Most of that wording you can find in Psalm 137. I can click the right things there, where he says, by the rivers of Babylon we sat down. The idea is Ezekiel is there and in Babylon by the river Kibar, and the soldiers, the taskmasters or whatever, saying, well, why don't you sing us one of those good old Jewish hymns that y'all used to sing all the time? And they couldn't sing. It says they hung their harps upon the willows. How can we sing in captivity? And it was that distressing. So there were emotions from all three groups: the group that was left in Babylon, the group as they were traveling to Babylon, and the group that was left in Jerusalem. My thinking is that the words of this song, Psalm 74, are the cries of the people, the poor people left in the land as they watched the destruction take place and were left to live in the aftermath. The thinking of those who remained in the land was that they had been forsaken by God, forgotten by God. And the fact that the writer here was praying to God indicates that he had retained a deep and abiding faith in God, even during this calamity. It doesn't say it didn't hurt, that he wasn't disturbed by it, confused by it, but he still had faith in God. He took his prayer to God. And this psalm serves as an illustration of what we should do when the worst possible catastrophe has happened in our lives. Don't react against God, but turn to God. Let him explain to us. Let him be that comfort to us. And even though the destruction or the calamity continues, it doesn't mean that God isn't careful or that God isn't concerned. So that's what I want to do in just a few minutes. I want to look at this psalm and pose the question, what do you do when the unthinkable happens? And the first thing the psalmist teaches us is talk to God about it. First thing you should do as a believer, your first response is to turn to God. The psalmist was discouraged, and he brought those feelings to God. The first step in recovering from a staggering blow, the illustration here is just bring it to God, pour it out to God. Do we do that in our songs? That's what he's going to do here in this song. Are there songs like that we sing?
Yeah, yeah. I have no friend like you. If heaven's not my home, then Lord, what would I do? He ain't just taking me.
Another one, are you weary? Heavy hearted? Are you grieving over joys departed? Tell it to Jesus alone.
Yep.
Tears flowing down your cheeks unbidden. Have you sins that to men's eyes are hidden? Tell it to Jesus alone. Do you fear the gathering clouds of sorrow? Are you anxious what tomorrow may be? Tell it to Jesus. Tell it to Jesus. Are you troubled with the thought of dying? For Christ's coming, are your kingdom, are you sighing? Tell it to Jesus alone. So we have songs like that. I don't know if we sing them with as much passion or depth as the psalmist may have because he was living that experience. But I think there are times when we feel it.
Yes. Night with Eben Pinion. That's the woo.
It is a sorrowful song, isn't it?
Yes.
The natural response of the believer should be to turn to God. In adversity, turn to God in prayer. Yep. And in this prayer, he begins by fervently pouring out his agony to God. Listen to what he says. "O God, why have you cast us off forever? Why does your anger smoke against the sheep of your pasture?" Even though he doesn't understand where it's coming from or why it's coming from, he turns to God. He's not angry with God. He questions God. He's confused by what's going on, but he turns to God. Picture in your mind what must have been going on around him, the circumstance that he was, and that's what I did all that reading. How do you understand these questions? Why have you cast us off forever? Why does the smoke of your anger come against the sheep of your pasture? Do you see what's going on in his life to provoke that question?
They never thought that would happen to them.
They just never, even though they were told this is going to happen. Isaiah was pretty specific about it, and Jeremiah was pretty specific about it. By the time Jeremiah is preaching about it, he's saying, this is going to happen. There's no chance for turning now. You had your chance for turning. I'm just telling you what's about to happen, and it happened. God seemed to have rejected them permanently, and as an Israelite, he had been warned repeatedly by the prophets that this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Amos, turn, over and again throughout the book of Amos, return to me, God says. And they would not. So when it happened, it's like the wind was knocked out of him. It was a severe blow, and he shouldn't have been blindsided, but he was.
Yeah. You can never prepare.
Knocked off his feet because he just didn't believe this could ever possibly happen. Why have you cast us off? Why does your anger smoke against us? Remember your congregation which you have purchased of old, the tribe of your inheritance which you have redeemed, this Mount Zion which you have dwelt. What's he doing?
He's trying to get the Lord to rethink about it. Like
he is imploring, he's begging, he's still knocked off his feet. He can't understand why he's in a whirlwind. I don't understand. God, remember us. We are your people. We are your congregation that you purchased of old. Don't forget that we are the tribe of your inheritance. This is the Mount Zion in which you have dwelt. They saw the presence of God come down in the fiery cloud and the pillar of cloud there on Mount Zion when the temple was built. This is the dwelling place of God. Don't forget that. He's trying to remind God as if God had forgotten. God had not forgotten, but this is how he reacts in the devastation, the blow that he has received in seeing his people in Jerusalem destroyed.
Desperate.
Lift up your feet to the perpetual desolations. The enemy has damaged everything in the sanctuary. Your enemies roar in the midst of your meeting place. They set up their banners for signs. They sing like men who lift up axes among the thick trees, and now they break down the carved work of the temple all at once with axes and hammers. They set fire, Lord, to your sanctuary. They have defiled the dwelling place of your name to the ground. They have said in their hearts, let us destroy altogether. They have burned up the meeting places of God in the land. So what's he seeing?
Destruction.
Absolute destruction, and in his mind, defiance of God, defiling of everything that's godly. He didn't take into consideration that the Jews had been defiling everything that's godly through their lack of worship or illicit worship, or their, as Amos says, selling the poor for a pair of shoes. But they didn't take into consideration all the evil that they were doing to one another. And God says, don't bring me your sacrifices. I don't want it. If you're going to live like this, if you're going to defy the covenant that we've made, don't bring me your sacrifices. It's a stench in my nostrils. He didn't see all of that. What he sees now is the Babylonians coming in here like heathens and just ravaging the house of God with axes and hammers. When he says there in verse, was it 3? Lift up your feet and come and see the damage. He's saying, run, God, run here and see what he's doing, what they're doing here. Come and visit the ruins and see what they're doing. Like he knew God had left, and he's saying, come back, see what they're doing to your place. They destroyed everything in the sanctuary. They burned it up. They peeled off the gold and the silver and plundered it and took it back to Babylon. Back in Solomon's day, it was a bragging right, I guess, that the temple was built and not the sound of a hammer or a saw was heard. In other words, the stones and timbers and so forth were cut so perfectly in the place where they were cut that when they brought them to Jerusalem, they just put them right into place. Hammer or chisel wasn't needed. And now they're here with hammers and axes, wearing it out. They're putting up their banners. The ensigns of Babylon are flying in the house of God. And the author he's astounded. God, come look at this. You won't believe it. And then he says, not only do we see their signs, but in verse 9, we do not see our signs. The prophets are gone. There's no one among us who knows anymore. They're gone. The priests, the prophets. Oh God, how long will the adversary reproach? How long will the enemy blaspheme your name? Why do you withdraw your hand, even your right hand? Take it out of your bosom and destroy them. How is he picturing God?
With his hands folded, just not.
Got his hands in his pocket or whatever, and God just watching. He says, take your hands out of your pocket and do something. Zap them, God. Sounds sort of like the imprecatory Psalms that we've read before, that he's calling down judgment from God on these blasphemous people. The priest, the prophet, the signs of Judaism were gone. But the signs of the enemy were hanging in the temple. He's blaming this on God. I say blaming. You're not doing anything. You're letting all these things happen, and you're not doing anything. But really, God has said, not only am I allowing this to happen, I'm doing this.
Well,
I'm doing this because my long suffering has run out. You've had opportunity to turn. You've had opportunity to repent, and you would not. And now the consequences are here. So the first thing he does is, even as hard as it may sound to us and as offensive as it might be to our ears, he is pouring his heart out to God. And it comes across as pretty strong words. But God doesn't rebuke him. This is a part of his grief process that he needs to get out, and God wants him to do that. So step one is talk to God.
Yes.
Step two is you've asked God not to forget. What about you?
Mm-hmm.
You don't forget. For God is my king from of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. You divided the sea by your strength. You broke the heads of the sea serpents in the waters. You broke the heads of Leviathan in pieces and gave them as food to the people inhabiting the wilderness. You broke open the fountain and the flood. You dried up the mighty rivers. What's he talking about?
All the magnificent, wonderful things that God did by taking them out, of captivity and vanquishing their enemies. And
so why does he bring this up?
Because he knows that God can do it.
That's right. He's acknowledging that, yes, I'm suffering, and yes, I'm going through this horrible time, and yes, I'm witnessing all these horrible things, but he says, my God is real. Mm-hmm. The gods of these Babylonians, he talks about the sea serpents and the Leviathans. The Babylonians had in their inscriptions or in the pictures that they drew, and so did some of the other pagan nations. They have myths about their gods that before time began, they wrestled with the Leviathans, they wrestled with the serpents, and their gods won. Well, the psalmist is saying, you know what, mine's not a myth. I have a real God. And I think he uses the Leviathan and the sea serpents and uses them metaphorically to refer to Egypt, to Pharaoh and his armies that God destroyed there in the sea. But he says, my God is real, and he did this, and he can do this. With much suffering as the psalmist is in, he acknowledges, God, I know he can get me out of this. So he's not giving up on God. Right. And that's one of the key things that we need to remember when we're going through such difficult times. God, don't give up on him. Because you don't understand him, question him, yes. That's okay. Express your thoughts, yes, but don't give up on God. He is the God who can save us. He's the God who can divide the sea and cause us to walk on dry ground. And don't forget, in your expressing yourself to God, don't forget that God is a God of love.
Yes.
While we don't understand the moment, the death of the child, the loss of the job, or whatever it is that you're going through, while you don't understand the moment, God has not left. He has not left the building, so to speak. He says, and this is something one of y'all brought up a few moments ago, the day is yours, the night is yours. You have prepared the night, the light, the sun. You have set all your borders of the earth. You have made the summer. What's he saying?
You are the creator of everything.
God is God. In all the ways that we can understand that, God is in control. That's how we would say it today. God is in control. I don't understand why he's letting this happen right now, but I know somehow, some way, this is going to work out to God's way. God is in control. He has not relinquished control. Satan has not defeated him. The devil has not overcome. God is in control. And whatever I'm going through in my life, or whatever's happening in my life right now, as painful as that might be, I know God's in control, and this is going to work out somehow. Maybe not in this life for me, but this is going to work out. In the occasion of this psalm, God is the one who brought this destruction, but he did not randomly bring it. He did this as a means of purification so that his will would be accomplished, and it would last. This purification process would last for 70 years. And God told him that at the beginning. You're going to go through this, and you're going to go through it for 70 years. It's going to look like I have departed for 70 years. And that's because God did depart for 70 years because of their constant evil. Daniel, in the book of Daniel, prays some marvelous prayers, confessing their sins and asking God to relent. And God did, but at the end of the 70 years, like He promised.
Yep. Yeah.
Sometimes we just have to go through it, but as you're going through it, don't turn against God. Remember, He's in control.
That's right.
Then finally, what do you do when the unthinkable happens in your life? Number one, take it to God. Don't forget God is there. Take it to God. And two, remember, God's in control and God is love. And while I may not understand what's going on right now, God is love. Number three, ask God for deliverance.
Yes.
Listen to Him. Remember this, that the enemy has approached, O Lord, and that a foolish people has blasphemed your name. Oh, do not deliver the life of your turtle dove to the wild beast. Do not forget the life of your poor forever. Have respect to the covenant, for the dark places of the earth are full of haunts and cruelty. Oh, do not let the oppressed return unashamed or return ashamed. The oppressed return ashamed. Let the poor and the needy praise your name. Arise, O God, plead your own cause. Remember how the foolish man reproaches you daily. Do not forget the voice of your enemies. The tumult of those who rise against you increases continually. So he's asking God in the end, I know who you are. I know what you've done. I know what you can do. And so he's asking for God. He's praying for God, to God, that He will deliver. And again, it sounds somewhat like the imprecatory Psalms that we talked about a few weeks ago, where the psalmist was calling down judgment upon the enemy. And that's what he's doing. But at the same time, he's asking for deliverance because he knows God can deliver. He asks God to remember the covenant. Now, in all of our prayers, we ask God to forgive us.
Yes.
We asked Him last time. We asked Him the time before that, and we asked Him the time before that. Did we think He forgot?
Nope.
But it's just the idea that we know God cares, and we keep that in our mind, that God is the forgiving God. Mm-hmm. God's people, Old Testament and New, have implored God to act on behalf of His name and His people, and I think it's not a wrong prayer to pray today. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you do when you're in distress?
Turn to the Lord, the good Lord.
When calamity has fallen, speak to God.
Yes.
Remember His goodness in the past and seek His salvation in the present. Mm-hmm. If you're going through a time like that, you can be assured, as terrible as your time may be, it wasn't as bad as what these people were going through.
All right.
And God did answer their prayer. Mm-hmm. He did bring judgment against them. His long suffering did come to an end, mm-hmm. But He did remember the covenant.
Sure did.
He remembered the covenant to bring Christ into this world, to bring salvation to you and I through that experience. And that's what all that was about, to bring those people back to a purity that God could use to bring Christ into the world. It is. All righty. That's Psalm 74. We're supposed to be going faster than this, but
that was gorgeous. Like, it don't feel painful after it all. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you go through your little roller coaster, but we got, we get to a good point, which is the same truth that we all know. God can deliver us. He will deliver us. He will always make good on His promise. The hope that we have for heaven is the reason why we are doing everything that we can to be with Him. Yeah.
Ladies, I appreciate y'all being with me tonight.
Thank you.
I hope that your life isn't calamitous as the Jeremiah was and the Psalmist here was. But if those times do come, you know where you can turn. You can turn to
we know what to do.
turn to God's people.
Yes. we're gonna keep y'all in prayer too, and
just appreciate it. And we will see you next week, same bat time, same bat channel.
Thank you. All right, love you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Yes, love you. Be blessed. Thank you, Brother Mike.
Thank you, Lisa. Let's see. Record. Where's the record button? Stop recording. Yes.